Today begins Module 5, which covers Chapter 5 in the textbook. We're going to look at methods. We're going to see how to pass arguments to a method. We'll delve deeper into local variables, as well as returning a value from a method, and how we can solve problems with methods. So methods are very useful because they allow us to take large problems and divide them into smaller, more manageable pieces. This is often known as divide and conquer. They help simplify programs, and they also allow us to reuse code. In other words, once we solve a smaller problem with a method, we can simply call that method again as opposed to having to write the code again. Now, we've already been using a method quite frequently in this course, and that's been the main method. The main method does not return a value, and thus it has the keyword void as part of the method declaration. Other methods that we have used include print line or print. Again, they do not return a value within the program. But then we do have value returning methods that we've seen, such as parseInt. ParseInt is a method that takes a string as an input argument and returns an integer. And all of those components have to be there in order for the parseInt method to work properly. To define a method, we need to have a header and a body. The header tells us the name of the method. It tells us what arguments the method is expecting and what it's going to return. And then the body of the method is the code that makes the method do something. It contains the actions that the method will execute. So here we have another method that looks sort of like the main method that we've been using over and over again, but this is not a main method. It starts out the same with public static void. For now, we'll just focus on this keyword void. Means that it is not going to return a value, and the name of the method is display message. And then we have these parentheses that are empty, and that signifies that the method does not require any parameters. It will not accept any parameters. Here we have the parts of a method header. The method modifiers, again, we've only seen public static. We'll talk more about what those mean in a moment. The return type, that word void again means it will not return anything. And the name of the method, you want to pick a descriptive name. This is something that you as a programmer get to decide what the method will be called. You want to pick a descriptive name, and note the camel case convention, the same convention we use for variables. If the method contains 2 words in it, in the name, then the first word is all lowercase. The second word begins with a capital letter, no spaces or special characters in between. And then we have the parentheses are empty, which means that it will not take any arguments. And here's the body of the method. All it will do is simply display the word hello to the screen. So the modifiers that we've been using have specific meanings. That keyword public means that the method is publicly available to code outside of the class. So it's available anywhere within the Java program, not just within the class that we're defining. And the keyword static means that that method belongs to a class, which is a more general possessive describer as opposed to a specific object. So we can create a method that only belongs to one specific object, one instance of the class. We're not going to do that today, but that's what those keywords mean. Already talked about the return type of void, the name, and the parentheses. So to call a method, all we do is provide the name of the method and parentheses. Now this is for calling a method that does not take any arguments and also will not return any value. For methods that do return values, it's slightly more complicated, but I think it's best explained with some examples. Let's look at some examples here. I do need to start up Dr. Java. Just give me a moment. All right, so while that's loading, I'll move on to the next slide. If we do want to document methods, the same as we want to document the rest of our code. As a reminder, a multi-line comment begins with /star. Okay, here's Dr. Java. So let's look at simple method.java. Let's begin chapter 5, simple method.java. So here we have a program that looks familiar the way it starts. Okay, public class, name of the file is simple method. We have our public static void main, so that's our main method. Okay, now we know that this is actually a method. And the method that we're calling is right here, display message. So there's the call to the method. Now here's the definition of the method. Note that the definition of the method occurs outside of the main method, okay? And that's very important, that the method be outside of the main method. You should not define one method inside of another method. But it is still within the class simple method, okay? It's still within the file, but outside of the main method. Here's the definition. Okay, public static void, we talked about what those mean. The name of the method, display message. The parentheses are empty. It doesn't take any parameters. And here's the body of the method. And this should look familiar. It's a print line, and it will display that to the screen. So let's go ahead and run this. And there's a couple other print lines here that are in main, and that's just to show that the program is going from main to the method and then back to main. So that's an important thing to note as well, is that once the method is finished, it will return to the code to the point immediately after the method was called. So it executes this line, it calls the method, which sends it down here, then it executes this line, then the method is done, and that puts it back to the point immediately after the method was called, and so it executes this line. Loop call.java. Look at this example. So here we have a for loop. This should look familiar. So this loop is going to count from 0 to 4. So it'll repeat 5 times. And each time it will call the same method that we saw earlier, display message. So we can put method calls inside of loops. We can also put loops inside of method calls. There's lots of things we can do. But in this example, we're running the loop and we're going to call the method 5 times. And there it is. Questions on that? Creditcard.java. So here we have a method. Oh, there's actually 2 methods here that we're interested in. So let's see how this is being set up. We have salary, which is of type double. Credit rating is an int, and input is a string. We're using a dialog box to display the question, what is your annual salary? We get that information from the user, store it in the variable salary. And then it asks for the credit rating on a scale of 1 to 10. Then we have an if condition. We're checking to make sure the salary is greater than 20,000 and the credit rating is greater than or equal to 7 out of 10. If both of those are true, then we call this method, qualify. Okay, so here we have a method call inside of an if-then statement. If it's not true, then we call this other method, no qualify. Let's look at those method definitions, which are down here. So here's the qualify method. It simply displays a message using a dialog box. Congratulations, you qualify. Otherwise, it calls this other method, I'm sorry, you do not qualify for the card. And then we have the system exit, which we need for exiting the input dialog string of methods. So let's go ahead and run this. So let's make it come out to true. So annual salary is say 30,000, and my credit rating is 9. So congratulations, you qualify. Now, if either one of those is false, I would not qualify. So if I had 30,000 annual salary, but my credit rating was 4, I'm sorry, you do not qualify. Okay, so the main point of this example is to show that you can call methods from inside of if, then, else clauses. Question? No? And deep and deeper.java. Let's look at that one. So in this program, we're starting in main, and we display a message to that effect. Then we call this method called deep. And here it says, I am now in deep. But now look at this. Inside of deep, we call another method. And here's another method called deeper. So it calls this method deeper. Then when that method finishes, it goes back to where it left off. So then it displays this message, I am back in deep. Then that method finishes, and that puts it back to main, and it'll say now I am back in main. So the main purpose of this example is to show that you can call methods from other methods. Okay, so we go from main to deeper, then back to deep, and back to main. Questions on that? Now we'll look at an example that passes an argument. So we've seen methods already that require an argument. Again, we'll look at the parseInt example. The parseInt requires a string as an argument, and it will return an integer. So in order to use this method correctly, we have to provide it with a string inside the parentheses, and we also have to be ready to accept what it's going to pass back to us. So that's why we need a variable over here of type integer and an assignment to be ready to accept what this method will pass back and store it in the variable. If any of those elements is missing, we'll get a compilation error. Okay. So let's look at this example, passArg.java. So here we have a method called displayValue, which requires a value, an argument to be passed in. And it looks like it's requiring an int. Here's the definition. Okay, it starts out the same as what we've seen before, public static void, the name of the method, public value. Then here we have the part of the method that tells us what type of data it's going to require. It's going to require an int, and it's going to store it in this variable called num. So in other words, whatever value gets passed in here will get stored in num down here. And then this line simply displays it. The value is, and then the value of num. So we can pass in an int in many different forms. We could pass in a number. We could pass in a variable of type int. We could pass in the result of a mathematical operation. We could even pass in the result of parseInt, which, as we just spoke about, does return a value of type int. So what's happening here in this line is that this method takes the string, converts it to an int, and then the int gets passed in to display value. So let's go ahead and run that. So we're passing the value of 5. We see that the 5 is displayed. Then we're passing in 10, which was initialized up here. We're passing in 5 times 4, 10 times 4, so that's 40. And then we're passing in 700. Okay, so that shows that we can provide the correct data type in many different ways, as long as the end result is that it is the correct data type, in this case, an int. You do have to make sure that you provide the correct data type. Here's an example in which the correct data type is not provided, and you would get an error. So in this case, display value, as we saw, is expecting an int, but we tried to give it a double, that will give an error. That will not work. We have to give it the data type it's expecting. We can also have multiple arguments being passed into methods. So in this example, we have this method showSum is expecting two values of type double, and they're called num1 and num2. So when we call this method, we have to provide both of those values. If we provide only one value, it will not work. If we provide 0 values, it will not work. If we provide 3 values, it will not work. We have to provide exactly the same number of values of the correct type. Yes? They have to be double because the method is defined to only accept double for both of them. Now you can do typecasting to convert an int to a double here where it's being called. So you can force it to become a double. But it does have to be a double at the time that it's called. And we can see what this method does. It calculates the sum and then simply displays the sum. It does not return the sum. It's not set up to return a value. It simply displays it. How are we doing on time? Arguments in Java are passed by value, which means that it's only the value of the variable that gets passed into the method, not the address, generally speaking. There is another paradigm called pass by reference, which is actually very common in other languages, but is not at least in any straightforward way, supported by Java. So let's look at this pass by value.java example. So here we have this method change me, which is accepting an int. So let's go look at what that does. It takes the value, stores it in this variable my value, and then it changes the value of my value to 0. But what we'll see when we run this is that that only changes the value of the variable locally within the method. After this method is complete, when we go back to main, number will revert back to its original value again. Okay, so in main, it's 99. And then in the method, it changes the value of this other variable to 0. Then we go back to main, and it's 99 again. So that signifies the importance of pass by value. That concludes our class for today. Thank you very much. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you tomorrow.